The night was quiet except for the hum of Ethan Hart's equipment. The lab, nestled on the outskirts of a sleepy coastal town, had become both his sanctuary and his prison. Ethan leaned over his cluttered desk, surrounded by blinking monitors and cables, tinkering with a prototype communication device he had dubbed Stellar Pulse. "Just one more tweak," he muttered to himself, his voice raspy from hours without speaking to another soul. His fingers flew across the keyboard, recalibrating frequencies to pick up interstellar noise. Ethan Hart was no ordinary scientist. A former astronaut with a reputation for reckless brilliance, he had once been the face of humanity's deep space exploration program. That was before the mission. That mission changed his life forever. Now, he was a man consumed. Not by ambition, but by memories. Memories of violet skin shimmering under an alien sun, of laughter that sounded like a melody, of eyes that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of his being. Lyra. He had tried to bury those memories, to convince himself it was nothing more than a fleeting connection. But late at night, when the world outside his lab was silent, her voice still echoed in his mind. A sudden spike in the device's readings snapped him out of his reverie. "What the hell?" Ethan frowned, leaning closer. The signal was faint but unmistakable, an intricate sequence of tones and pauses. His heart raced as recognition hit him like a tidal wave. It wasn't just any signal. It was their melody, the one they had hummed together on her world, a secret thread connecting their hearts across the void. "No way," he whispered, his voice trembling. He ran a quick diagnostic, convinced it had to be an error, but the pattern was deliberate, precise. It was Lyra. Without thinking, Ethan activated the device's response mechanism. "Lyra, is that you?" His voice cracked, a mix of hope and disbelief. The signal pulsed again, stronger this time, as if answering him. He stared at the screen, his chest tightening. "Damn it, Ethan, get a grip," he muttered, pacing the room. "It's been years. You're imagining things." But deep down, he knew the truth. She was out there, and she was reaching for him. The signal shifted, forming a series of coordinates. Ethan's breath caught. It was a location. On Earth. "Are you coming here?" he whispered, his mind racing. Why now? How? The questions piled up, but one thought drowned out the rest. She's coming back. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparations. Ethan couldn't sit still. He cleaned the lab for the first time in months, cleared the overgrown path leading to his property, and stocked up on supplies as if hosting an interstellar guest were an ordinary occurrence. "Don't lose it now, Hart," he muttered, glancing at the sky every few minutes. He double-checked the coordinates. They pointed to a secluded clearing a few miles from his lab, a spot he had often visited to stargaze. On the third night, the wait ended. Ethan stood in the clearing, the cool breeze ruffling his hair. The sky was clear, the stars shining like 1,000 tiny beacons. And then he saw it, a streak of light cutting through the darkness, descending rapidly. "Lyra," he whispered, his heart pounding. The craft was almost invisible, its sleek surface blending seamlessly with the night. As it landed, a faint hum filled the air, sending vibrations through the ground. The hatch opened, and there she was. Lyra stepped out, her form illuminated by the soft glow of her ship. Her violet skin shimmered, and her silver hair cascaded like liquid metal. But it was her eyes that caught him, those luminous, otherworldly eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within them. "Ethan," she said, her voice a melodic blend of joy and relief. He was frozen, unable to speak. It wasn't until she took a hesitant step forward that he found his voice. "Lyra," he said, his throat tight. You're really here." "I promised I would return," she said softly, her lips curving into a smile. Without thinking, he closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. Her warmth, her scent, everything about her was achingly familiar. "I thought I'd never see you again," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I couldn't stay away," she replied, her hands resting lightly on his chest. "I needed to see you, to know if you still feel the same." Ethan pulled back slightly, his hands cupping her face. "Lyra, I've been waiting for you every day since you left. Of course I feel the same." She smiled, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "It wasn't easy to come back. My people, they wouldn't understand." "Then why did you risk it?" he asked, searching her face. "Because you're worth it," she said simply. Ethan felt a surge of emotion he couldn't put into words. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture they had shared on her world. "We have so much to talk about," he said after a moment. "So much I need to know." "And so much I need to tell you," she agreed. They stood there in the clearing, two souls from different worlds, reunited against all odds. For the first time in years, Ethan felt whole. "Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let's go home." As they walked back to the lab, their fingers intertwined, Ethan couldn't help but glance at her every few seconds, as if afraid she might vanish. Lyra caught his gaze and smiled, squeezing his hand. "Don't worry," she said softly. "I'm here to stay." And for the first time in a long time, Ethan allowed himself to believe it. The sound of the lab door hissing shut echoed in Ethan's ears as he led Lyra inside. His home wasn't much, just a converted warehouse stuffed with half-finished projects, books, and gadgets, but it was the closest thing he had to a sanctuary. "Sorry about the mess," Ethan said, scratching the back of his neck as he cleared off a chair for her. "I wasn't exactly expecting company." Lyra tilted her head, her glowing eyes scanning the room with curiosity. "This is your nest?" "My nest?" Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, I guess you could call it that. It's not much, but it's home." She ran her fingers along a workbench, pausing at a dismantled telescope. "These tools, they're primitive, but they carry your ingenuity. You've created a world within these walls." He couldn't help but smile. "Well, it's not exactly interstellar travel, but it gets the job done." Lyra's gaze softened as she turned to him. "You've changed, Ethan. There's more solitude in your spirit." Ethan sighed and leaned against the wall. "Let's just say life hasn't been the same since I got back. People think I went crazy after the mission. I couldn't exactly tell them the truth about you." Her expression clouded. "And yet, you waited for me." "I didn't have a choice," he admitted. "You were the only thing that felt real after everything else fell apart." Lyra stepped closer, her presence magnetic. "Then I wasn't wrong to come back." Later that evening, Ethan cooked a simple meal, pasta and fresh vegetables from the market. He wasn't much of a chef, but he wanted to share something human with her. "Do you eat food like this?" Ethan asked as he set the table. "Not exactly," Lyra replied, inspecting the plate with fascination. "My people absorb nutrients directly, but I've studied your methods. This smells intriguing." He laughed. "Well, don't get your hopes too high. It's nothing fancy." Lyra watched as he twirled spaghetti onto a fork and took a bite. Mimicking him, she picked up her fork with delicate fingers, her movements slow and deliberate. The first bite made her eyes widen. "This is vibrant!" she exclaimed, a hint of surprise in her melodic voice. Ethan grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment." As they ate, conversation flowed easily. Lyra asked about his life since their last meeting, and Ethan shared stories about Earth, the good and the bad. He told her about the beauty of the oceans, the chaos of human cities, and the endless possibilities that came with being human. "And you?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. "What's been going on in your world?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze dropping to her plate. "Much has changed since you left. My people have grown restless. They fear the unknown, and they fear you." Ethan blinked. "Me? Why would they fear me?" "Your kind," Lyra said softly, "has a potential my people don't fully understand. You possess an energy, a drive, that we cannot replicate. Some believe it's dangerous." He frowned. "Dangerous? That's ridiculous. We're just trying to survive, like everyone else." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I know that, but fear often clouds reason. It's why I had to come in secret." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So, they don't know you're here?" "No," she admitted. "If they did, they would try to stop me, or worse, harm you." The weight of her words settled between them. Ethan's protective instincts flared, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You didn't have to risk all this for me." "I did," she said firmly, "because without you, I am incomplete." After dinner, they moved to the couch. Ethan lit a fire in the small fireplace, the warmth filling the room. Lyra sat beside him, her legs tucked beneath her, studying the flickering flames. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just a fire," Ethan replied, though he couldn't help but smile at her wonder. "It's more than that," Lyra said. "It's a reflection of you. Humans burn with this intensity. It's both destructive and life-giving." He chuckled. "You're making me sound a lot more poetic than I am." "Perhaps," she said, tilting her head to meet his gaze. "But it's the truth." For a moment, silence enveloped them, the crackling fire the only sound. Ethan felt a knot in his chest, a mix of longing and uncertainty. He had spent years dreaming of this moment, but now that she was here, he didn't know what to say. "I missed you," he said finally. Lyra's eyes softened. "I missed you too." "You have no idea how much I've thought about this," he continued, his voice low. "About you, about what we had. It's the only thing that kept me going." "I thought of you every day," she admitted. "Your world is so far from mine, but in my heart, you were always close." Ethan swallowed hard. "Lyra, what happens now? You said your people wouldn't understand. How can we—" She placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "We'll figure it out. Together." Later, as the fire burned low, Ethan showed Lyra his telescope. They stood on the balcony, the night sky sprawling above them. "This is how I kept myself sane," Ethan said, adjusting the lens. "Looking up there and wondering if you were looking back." Lyra leaned close, peering through the telescope. "Your determination amazes me. Even in the face of the unknown, you never gave up." "That's what humans do," he said with a grin. "We're stubborn like that." She smiled, her luminous eyes reflecting the stars. "It's one of the things I love about you." Ethan froze, his heart skipping a beat. "You love me?" Lyra turned to him, her expression unguarded. "I do, and I hope you feel the same." He took her hands in his, his voice steady but full of emotion. Lyra, I've loved you since the moment I met you, and I'll keep loving you no matter what happens. The distance between them disappeared as he leaned in, their lips meeting in a kiss that was tender and electric, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. In that moment, under the vast expanse of the universe, they were no longer two beings from different worlds. They were simply two souls bound together by love. The following morning, Ethan woke to sunlight streaming through the windows of his lab. For a brief moment, he thought the events of the previous night had been a dream, a vivid, impossible fantasy. Then he heard soft footsteps behind him. "You rise with the sun," Lyra said, her melodic voice carrying a hint of amusement. She stood in the doorway, her silver hair shimmering in the light, a loose human shirt draped over her frame. Ethan couldn't help but smile. "It's either that or stay up all night fixing broken tech. You get used to it." Lyra tilted her head, studying him. "Your resilience fascinates me. Even after all you've endured, you keep moving forward." He shrugged, pulling on a shirt. "It's what we do. Adapt and survive. And yet, you've created beauty within that struggle." She gestured to the room, where sunlight illuminated the cluttered desks and half-finished projects. "Your creations reflect your spirit." Ethan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wouldn't call it beauty. It's more controlled chaos." Lyra stepped closer, her luminous eyes meeting his. "Chaos can be beautiful too." The day unfolded with a quiet intimacy. Ethan introduced Lyra to human life in small, tangible ways. They walked along the rocky coastline near his lab, the salty breeze ruffling their hair. Ethan showed her how to skip stones across the water, laughing when her first attempt sank with a splash. "You make it look so easy," Lyra said, frowning at the smooth stone in her hand. "It's all in the wrist," Ethan replied, demonstrating again. "Here, let me show you." He moved behind her, guiding her hand with his own. The warmth of her skin against his sent a shiver through him, but he kept his focus. "Now, flick it like this." The stone sailed across the water, bouncing twice before sinking. Lyra's face lit up with triumph. "I did it!" "Not bad for an alien," Ethan teased, grinning. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in the breeze. Perhaps humans aren't the only ones who can adapt. Later, they returned to the lab, where Ethan shared some of his work. He showed Lyra the stellar pulse, explaining how it had been designed to pick up faint interstellar signals. "This is how I found you," he said, his voice tinged with pride. Lyra ran her fingers along the device, her expression thoughtful. "It's remarkable. Your technology is still young, yet it bridges the stars." "It's nothing compared to what your people can do," Ethan said, leaning against the desk. "But it was driven by something my people often overlook," she replied, meeting his gaze. "Passion. Your determination is what makes your creations extraordinary." Ethan felt a warmth rise in his chest at her words. "Maybe, or maybe I just got lucky." Lyra smiled. "Luck didn't bring us back together, Ethan. You did." As the sun dipped below the horizon, they ventured out again, this time to a nearby hill where the stars stretched endlessly above them. Ethan carried a blanket and a portable telescope, setting up under the open sky. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said, adjusting the telescope. Lyra leaned over, her breath warm against his neck as she peered through the lens. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Your sky is so alive." Ethan smiled. "You should see it during a meteor shower. It's like the universe is putting on a show just for us." Lyra looked up, her gaze lingering on the stars. "We have stars too, but they don't feel the same. Your world breathes with life. It's raw, untamed. It's chaotic," Ethan offered, grinning. "Magnificent," she corrected, her eyes shining. They lay back on the blanket, the telescope forgotten as they stared at the sky. Ethan found himself talking about his childhood, about nights spent stargazing with his father, and how those moments had inspired him to reach for the stars. "And now you've brought the stars to me," he said, glancing at Lyra. She turned to him, her expression soft. "And you've shown me what it means to truly live." As the night deepened, their conversation grew quieter, more intimate. Lyra told Ethan about her home, a vast, crystalline city suspended in the clouds of a gas giant. She described the harmony of her people, their reliance on logic and reason, and their discomfort with emotions. "My connection with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is something they cannot understand. To them, love is an anomaly, a distraction. But to you?" Ethan asked, his heart pounding. "To me," Lyra said, reaching out to touch his face. "It's everything." Ethan covered her hand with his thumb brushing against her skin. "Lyra, I don't care what your people think. All that matters is that you're here." "And I'll stay," she said, her voice trembling. "No matter the cost." Their lips met again, this time slower, deeper, as if the universe itself had aligned to bring them together. The warmth of her touch, the softness of her lips, it was all Ethan could focus on. When they finally pulled apart, Lyra rested her forehead against his. "You're my bridge, Ethan, my link to something greater." He smiled, his voice steady despite the emotions surging through him. "And you're mine." Under the vast expanse of stars, two souls from different worlds found solace in each other, their love a beacon that defied the boundaries of space and time. The days that followed were unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. His solitary world, once defined by late nights tinkering and endless questions about the stars, had come alive with Lyra's presence. Her curiosity was boundless, her laughter intoxicating, and her perspective on human life, both awe-filled and profound, made him see his world with fresh eyes. But as joyful as their reunion was, a lingering tension began to creep into the edges of their time together. Ethan couldn't ignore the hints of hesitation in Lyra's voice, the way she would sometimes fall silent, staring out into the distance. One evening, as the two of them stood on the balcony of the lab, gazing at the moonlit waves below, Ethan decided to address the unspoken. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice soft but firm. "What's going on, Lyra?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she traced her fingers along the cool metal railing, her luminous eyes reflecting the stars. Finally, she turned to him. "There are things I haven't told you," she admitted. Ethan felt his chest tighten. "Like what?" Lyra looked away, as though gathering her thoughts. "My people, they've been watching. Ever since your mission, they've monitored Earth more closely than you realize." Ethan frowned. "Watching? Why? I thought they were content to keep their distance." "At first, they were," Lyra explained. "But your drive, your adaptability, it fascinates them and frightens them. They see humanity's potential not just to thrive, but to disrupt." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, processing her words. "So, they see us as a threat?" "Not all of them," she said quickly, stepping closer. "But enough to raise concerns. That's why my return was forbidden. They're afraid that forging a connection with you will destabilize our world, and yours. He stared at her, the weight of her confession sinking in. So, what does this mean? Are they coming here? Lyra hesitated, her gaze meeting his. I don't know, but I fear they won't remain passive for long. The revelation set Ethan on edge. Over the next few days, he worked tirelessly in the lab, modifying the stellar pulse to detect any unusual activity in Earth's orbit. Lyra stayed by his side, assisting him when she could, but her presence was a constant reminder of the precarious balance they were walking. One afternoon, as they reviewed the data together, a sharp beep sounded from the console. Ethan's heart jumped. What is it? Lyra asked, leaning over his shoulder. He scanned the screen, his fingers flying over the keyboard. It's a distortion in the upper atmosphere. Something's there. Something big. Lyra's expression grew serious. Show me. Ethan enhanced the signal, and a faint outline appeared on the monitor. A massive vessel, its shape alien yet unmistakably advanced, hovering just beyond the planet's detection systems. That's one of ours, Lyra confirmed, her voice tight. Ethan swore under his breath. They're here already. What do we do? We wait, she said, though her tone was far from certain. For what? He demanded, his frustration spilling over. For them to decide whether we're worth erasing? They won't act without reason, Lyra said, placing a hand on his arm. But we must be careful. If they sense hostility, it could provoke them. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. This isn't how I imagined our time together would go. Lyra's gaze softened. Neither did I. But we'll face this together, Ethan. I won't let them take you from me. That night, sleep eluded them both. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint glow of the stellar pulse across the room. Lyra joined him, her presence a quiet comfort in the dim light. I'm sorry, she said, breaking the silence. For what? He asked, turning to her. For bringing this danger into your life, she said, her voice heavy with guilt. I thought I could return without consequence, but I underestimated how closely I was being watched. Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. You don't need to apologize for coming back to me, Lyra. If anything, I should thank you. You gave me a reason to believe in something again. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. You're too kind, Ethan. Too forgiving. I'm not forgiving anything, he said, pulling her closer. I'm just refusing to let fear take away what we have. The next day, they ventured into the nearby town, blending in with the locals as they strolled through the bustling market. Ethan wanted to give Lyra a glimpse of humanity at its best, simple moments of connection and joy. Lyra marveled at the colorful stalls, the aroma of freshly baked bread, and the laughter of children chasing each other through the narrow streets. Your people are so vibrant, she said, her voice filled with wonder. Even in the smallest acts, there's life. That's what we fight for, Ethan said. The little things, they're what make it all worth it. As they wandered, Ethan noticed a man at the edge of the market, his posture stiff and his gaze fixed on them. The man wore plain clothes, but something about him set Ethan on edge. Lyra, he murmured, steering her away from the man. We need to go. She followed his lead without question, her hand gripping his tightly. Who was that? She asked once they were out of earshot. I don't know, Ethan admitted, glancing over his shoulder. But he wasn't just a local. He was watching us. Lyra's expression darkened. They might already be among you. Back at the lab, Ethan bolted the doors and double-checked the security systems. The encounter had left him rattled, and Lyra's unease only deepened his concern. "They won't harm you directly," Lyra said, pacing the room. "Not yet. But they might try to observe, to test your reactions." "Why not just talk to us?" Ethan asked, frustration bubbling to the surface. "If they're so advanced, why all the cloak and dagger?" "Because they fear what they might hear," she said simply. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Well, they're not going to scare me off. I'm not going anywhere, Lyra. Not without you." She stopped pacing, her gaze locking onto his. "And I won't let them take you. Whatever happens, we face it together." Ethan pulled her into his arms, their bond stronger than the uncertainty that loomed over them. For now, they had each other, and that was enough to keep the darkness at bay. But both of them knew the storm was far from over. The following morning, Ethan's mind churned with plans. He had always been a problem solver, and this situation, alien surveillance, looming danger, and the stakes of protecting Lyra, demanded his sharpest focus. The night's rest had done little to ease his tension, but waking up with Lyra at his side reminded him why he had to keep pushing forward. Over coffee, he laid out his thoughts. "We can't just sit around and wait for them to make the next move," Ethan said, pacing across the room. "We need to figure out what they're doing here, and why." Lyra sipped her drink, her expression thoughtful. "Their vessel is likely cloaked to avoid detection, but if we could intercept their communications, it might reveal their intentions." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do we do that? I don't exactly have alien eavesdropping gear lying around." Lyra gave him a faint smile. "You underestimate yourself. The stellar pulse could be adapted for that purpose, but we'd need to create a resonance filter to isolate their frequency." Ethan's mind immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. "Okay, I can work with that, but we'll need to amplify the signal strength. If their tech is as advanced as you say, it's going to take a lot to punch through." Lyra nodded. "I can help. My people's methods may be unfamiliar to you, but together, we can bridge the gap." The next several hours were a blur of activity. Ethan and Lyra worked side by side, tweaking the stellar pulse and jury-rigging an amplifier from spare parts. Despite the tension of their situation, Ethan couldn't help but admire how seamlessly they collaborated. "Pass me the capacitor," Ethan said, his voice muffled as he crouched under the console. Lyra handed him the part, her fingers brushing against his. "Your systems are crude but resourceful," she said, her tone carrying a mix of amusement and respect. "Crude?" Ethan shot her a mock glare as he emerged, smudges of grease on his cheek. "I'll have you know this crude system found you, didn't it?" She laughed, a sound that made the room feel lighter. "Touché, Ethan." Despite the gravity of their task, there were moments of levity that reminded them why they were fighting so hard to stay together. By nightfall, the modified stellar pulse was ready. Ethan powered it up, the machine humming to life with a low, steady vibration. "Now comes the tricky part," Lyra said, her fingers dancing over the console. "If they're communicating, we'll need to isolate their signal from the natural electromagnetic noise of your planet." "Leave that to me," Ethan said, adjusting the controls. His eyes were glued to the monitor as waveforms danced across the screen. Minutes stretched into an hour, the room thick with tension as they searched for any trace of alien communication. Then, suddenly, the monitor flickered, and a faint, rhythmic pattern appeared. "That's it," Lyra said, her voice taut with excitement. Ethan leaned forward, his heart racing. "It's a data stream. Can you decode it?" Lyra nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The alien script that filled the screen was incomprehensible to Ethan, but Lyra's expression grew increasingly grim as she worked. "What does it say?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. Lyra hesitated before answering. "They're observing human population centers, monitoring patterns of behavior, resource usage, and energy output. It's an analysis of your species' potential for expansion." Ethan's stomach sank. "And they're divided," she admitted. "Some believe humanity should be left alone to develop naturally. Others see your kind as a risk that must be contained." Ethan felt a surge of anger. "Contained? What gives them the right to decide that?" Lyra placed a calming hand on his arm. "It's fear, Ethan. Fear of the unknown, of what they don't understand. They've seen how quickly your kind evolves, how you adapt to challenges. To them, you're unpredictable." "And that's a bad thing?" he snapped, pacing the room. "It's not," she said softly. "But fear doesn't always follow reason." As the implications of the message sank in, Ethan felt a renewed sense of determination. "We can't let them interfere with Earth. We need to show them we're not a threat." Lyra's expression grew somber. "That won't be easy. The faction pushing for containment won't be swayed by words alone." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then we'll give them proof. If we can transmit a signal back to their ship, something that demonstrates what humanity is capable of, not in terms of destruction, but innovation and resilience, maybe we can change their minds." Lyra considered this, her eyes shining with admiration. "You would risk everything to protect your world?" Ethan met her gaze, his voice steady. "For my world, and for you." The two of them worked late into the night, crafting a message that would encapsulate humanity's potential. Ethan pulled snippets of human history, moments of triumph and ingenuity, space exploration, breakthroughs in medicine, acts of kindness that transcended borders. "This is who we are," Ethan said as he compiled the data. "Not perfect, but worth saving." Lyra's voice was tinged with awe. "You've captured something my people often overlook, the beauty in imperfection." With the message complete, they prepared to transmit it. Lyra configured the stellar pulse to send the signal directly to the alien vessel, bypassing Earth's networks to avoid detection. "Are you ready?" she asked, her hand hovering over the controls. Ethan nodded. "Let's do this." The signal burst forth, a stream of data hurtling toward the alien ship. For a few agonizing moments, there was silence. Then, the console beeped. A response. "They're acknowledging the transmission," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned closer to the monitor. "And?" Lyra's eyes widened as she read the reply. "They're reconsidering. They've agreed to observe further before taking any action." Ethan exhaled, relief flooding through him. "That's a start. It's not over, but it's a start." Lyra turned to him, her expression filled with both hope and gratitude. "You've done what many thought impossible, Ethan. You've given them a reason to believe in your kind." He smiled, pulling her into his arms. "We've done it. Together." As they stood in the glow of the console, the weight of the universe seemed to lift, if only for a moment. But both of them knew the challenges ahead would demand even more from their unbreakable bond. The next few days passed in a haze of cautious optimism. The alien vessel remained in orbit, silent but ever present, its shadow a reminder of the precarious line Ethan and Lyra were walking. Ethan kept busy fine-tuning the stellar pulse and monitoring the ship's activity, while Lyra helped him refine their message in case further communication was needed. One afternoon, as they worked in the lab, the tension that had been simmering finally bubbled to the surface. "We can't keep living like this," Ethan said, slamming a hand on the desk. "Waiting for them to make the next move. It's driving me insane." Lyra looked up from her station, her expression calm but firm. "Patience is our best weapon right now. Reacting out of fear could undo everything we've worked for." "I get that," Ethan replied, running a hand through his hair. "But how do I sit here and do nothing while an alien ship decides our fate?" Lyra stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "You're not doing nothing. You've already shown them what humanity is capable of. Now we must trust that they'll make the right choice." Ethan sighed, her touch grounding him. "I just wish I knew what they were thinking." "Perhaps there's a way," Lyra said after a moment. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "My people's ships are equipped with neural resonance links," she explained. "If I can connect to their system, I might be able to access their deliberations directly." Ethan frowned. "That sounds risky. What if they detect you?" "They won't," Lyra assured him. "Not if I'm careful, but I'll need your help to amplify the connection." Ethan hesitated, the thought of Lyra putting herself in danger gnawing at him. "Are you sure about this?" She met his gaze, determination shining in her eyes. "If it means protecting you and your world, then yes, I'm sure." That evening, they set up the equipment under the cover of darkness. The lab was filled with a low hum as Lyra calibrated the neural resonance link, her movements precise and focused. Ethan stood beside her, his heart pounding. "What will you do once you're in?" "I'll listen," Lyra said. "And if I can, I'll influence their decision. My voice still carries weight among my people, even if I've defied their orders." As she prepared to initiate the connection, Ethan reached out, gripping her hand. "Be careful, Lyra. I can't lose you again." She smiled, her expression soft. "You won't." With that, she activated the link. Lyra's eyes glazed over as her mind synced with the alien network. Ethan watched anxiously, his fingers hovering over the controls in case something went wrong. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before Lyra finally blinked, her focus returning. "What did you find?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "They're conflicted," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "But there's hope. The message we sent, it swayed some of them. They see the value in humanity's potential." "And the others?" "They're pushing for containment," Lyra admitted. "But they've agreed to delay any action until they've observed more." Ethan exhaled, relief washing over him. "That gives us time." Lyra nodded, her expression resolute. "Time to prove that love, resilience, and hope are stronger than fear." The alien ship's presence loomed as Ethan and Lyra worked tirelessly to solidify humanity's case. They crafted a new transmission, this one more personal, highlighting the connections, love, and sacrifices that defined human existence. As they prepared to send the updated signal, Lyra hesitated. "There's something else I need to tell them," she said. Ethan looked at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "What is it?" "My defection," she explained. "If I explain why I chose to return to you, it might help them understand the depth of human emotion and why it's worth preserving." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Won't that make you a bigger target?" "Perhaps," Lyra admitted. "But it's a risk I'm willing to take. They need to see that love isn't a weakness. It's a strength. Ethan reached for her hand, his grip firm. Then we'll do it together. The message was a masterpiece of vulnerability and conviction. Lyra spoke of her bond with Ethan, how it had taught her to see the universe through new eyes. She described humanity's potential for growth and the beauty of their imperfections. When the transmission was sent, the waiting began anew. The hours dragged on, the silence from the alien ship deafening. Then, finally, a response came. Lyra read the message aloud, her voice trembling with emotion. They've agreed to withdraw. Humanity will be left to develop on its own, without interference. Ethan's heart soared. We did it! Lyra smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. No, Ethan, you did it. Your courage, your determination. It's what convinced them to see your world differently. As the alien ship disappeared from Earth's orbit, Ethan and Lyra stood together under the night sky, their hands intertwined. The threat had passed, but their journey was far from over. What now? Ethan asked, his voice quiet. Lyra leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. Now we build a future, together. Under the vast expanse of stars, they found peace in each other, their love a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of connection across worlds. The days that followed the alien ship's departure were some of the quietest Ethan had ever experienced, yet his heart had never felt fuller. The weight of the unknown no longer hung over them like a storm cloud, and for the first time since Lyra's return, they could simply be. Ethan stood on the beach at twilight, the lab's silhouette behind him as the sun dipped below the horizon. Lyra was ahead, her bare feet sinking into the cool sand as she gazed out at the endless expanse of ocean. Her silver hair glimmered in the fading light, and her luminous eyes reflected the orange and pink hues of the setting sun. He approached her quietly, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him without hesitation, her warmth grounding him in a way nothing else could. I think I finally understand why you love this place, Lyra said, her voice soft and contemplative. Ethan smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. It's the stillness, isn't it? Out here, nothing else matters. She nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. Your planet, your people. You fight so fiercely for moments like this. It's beautiful, fragile, but beautiful. You're a part of this now, he said, his voice firm. You're not just some visitor, Lyra. You belong here, with me. Lyra turned to face him, her hands resting on his chest. Ethan, I've never belonged anywhere before. My world always saw me as different, as someone who questioned too much, who felt too deeply. She paused, her voice trembling. But with you, I feel whole. Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing against her soft skin. You're not just whole, Lyra. You're everything. You've shown me there's more to life than what I can touch or build. You've made me believe in something bigger than myself. Her eyes shimmered, tears threatening to fall. I used to think love was a weakness, that it made us vulnerable. But now I see it's the one thing that makes us strong. It's why I came back, Ethan. You're my home. Ethan couldn't hold back anymore. He tilted her chin upward, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that spoke of every word left unsaid, every moment they had fought to stay together. Lyra melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as the world around them faded into the background. The kiss deepened, filled with the urgency of all they had endured and the promise of everything that lay ahead. Lyra's fingers wove through his hair, and Ethan held her tightly, as though letting go might shatter the fragile reality they had built together. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, Lyra's cheeks were flushed, her alien beauty glowing in the dim light. "I love you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crashing waves. Ethan smiled, his forehead resting against hers. "And I love you, more than you'll ever know." The evening stretched into night as they walked along the shoreline, their hands intertwined. They spoke of dreams, of what they could build together now that the threat was gone. Lyra marveled at the simplest of things, the feel of the sand between her toes, the sound of the waves, the scent of salt in the air. Ethan found joy in showing her his world, seeing it anew through her eyes. As the stars emerged one by one, Lyra stopped and turned to him, her expression soft but serious. "There's one thing I need to know, Ethan. If my people ever decide to return, if they ever threaten your world again, what would you do?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I'd fight for us, for you, for Earth. But I don't think it'll come to that. We've shown them what humanity stands for, and you've shown me that love is the most powerful argument of all." Lyra smiled, her hand resting over his heart. "You always see the best in people, even in me. That's why I'll never leave you again." Ethan pulled her close, their bodies pressed together as they stood under the infinite sky. "We'll face whatever comes together, no matter what." Later that night, back in the cozy confines of the lab, they lay tangled together on the bed, the room bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. Lyra traced lazy patterns across Ethan's chest, her touch soothing and tender. "Do you ever wonder," she mused, "how the universe brought us together? How, out of all the infinite possibilities, it was you and me?" Ethan chuckled, brushing a strand of silver hair from her face. "I try not to think about it too much. Feels like tempting fate." Lyra smiled, her head resting against his shoulder. "I don't believe in fate, but I believe in us." Ethan kissed her forehead, his voice a whisper. "So do I. Always." As the night deepened, they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, the sound of the ocean a gentle lullaby. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no fear, no uncertainty, only the quiet, unshakable bond they shared. And under the watchful stars, they dreamed of a future that was wholly, unmistakably theirs.